Hi everyone, this is a short video to cover the task in exercise 2 to create the simple quiz application. So I'm going to launch Visual Studio and take you through it step by step. So the first thing we're going to do once Visual Studio launches is we're going to create our WPF application. So let's create a new project. And we're picking the WPF application. So remember, there is a lot of things you can create, so make sure you do have the C# language selected, and that narrows down all the different things that are available for C#. So we are going to be creating the WPF app. So if we select that and click on next. And again, you should always browse and pick somewhere appropriate to store your solution, and also of course give it a name. So I'm just going to call it Simple Quiz App and then click on create. So this will create our project, and remember, by default we always get one window to start us off for free, and that window comes with two files. We've got the file that contains the XAML code, which is the code that describes the user interface, and we've got the code that contains the C# code that provides the instructions to indicate what happens when the user interacts with the interface. So here's the two files over here in the Solution Explorer. So there's the XAML, which is this code here, and if I extend that, you'll see there's the C#. So first thing is, as we said before, we've got a blank window. So let's go ahead and put some UI elements onto that window. So I'm going to start off with a label just to give my quiz a title. So I've dragged it across, I've resized it, and I'm going to come over here to the properties window, and I'm going to change the content to say simple quiz. I can make some changes to the text, so I'll make it a bit bigger because the text is quite small, and because it's a title I'm going to stick it on bold as well. Great, so there we have our header, and then of course you can move it around and centre it as appropriate. Next thing I'm going to do is put on the question. So again, I'm going to use, well, in fact this time I'll use a text block just to use something different. So a text block allows us, when the program's running as well as before, it allows us to put information and display it on the screen to the user. The nice thing about a text block is that the user cannot interact with it, so they can't type over it. So it's pretty good when you want to show the user instructions, or you want to show them something that you don't want them to be able to edit. So we've got our text block. Again, I'll up the size of the text, make it 25, and instead of saying text block, I'm going to change the text to ask the question, what is the capital city of Australia? Okay, so I need to do a wee bit of resizing here, so really easy, just dragging, moving things around is appropriate. Go, that looks alright. Or questions, I should really put in a question mark, shouldn't I? Okay, so let me just highlight the box, go back to my question, and I'll just go to the end and stick in the question mark. There we go, that's better. Okay, I now need to provide the 4 answers. It's a multiple choice question, so again I can use text blocks or I can use labels. So I'll just use text blocks again. So I'm going to drag this across, and again I'm going to change the size to 25, and I'm going to change the text to say A. So answer A is Sydney, like that. Now, one of the nice things you can actually do, which is a wee bit of a cheat, is you can actually Control C and Control V to copy items. So I want 4 of these, so just so they're all the same size, I'm just going to copy and then I'll edit them to change the text. So you need to highlight the text block, Control C, and then you can Control V. So I think I've done 4 of them. It's just pasted them all on the top of each other. So I should have done 4. Yeah, that's good. Okay, So obviously I now need to go and update each of these. So I'm going to say B is Perth. This one I'm going to make C, which is Auckland. And this one I'm going to make D, which is Canberra. Okay, super. Right, and again I can move these around and make them more central, etc., and tidy it up a wee bit. They're all minor things to be able to do. So the next thing is I need some way of getting the user's input, getting their answer. So I need to use an input control. So the most common input control that we'll use for this course is a text box, and that allows the user to type or enter a value into the text box, which we in our program can then grab and look at. So first thing I'm going to do is use a label to give them an instruction to tell them to enter a value. So I've dragged across a label, resize it. I'm going to up it to 25 again, and I'm going to say enter answer, and then put in brackets A, B, C, D, just to give them a hint. I should say or D. How does that look? Let's see. There we go. That looks all right. And I'm just going to move that over a wee bit. And then, of course, there's instructions. So now I need to actually drag the text box. So text box, as I said, is an element that the user can actually type into. Now, because this is something that I want to be able to access in my code, I want to be able to look at this text box and find out what value they've put in. It's a good idea when you drag across the text box to give it a name. Now, all of these previous things we've dragged across are automatically given a name, but if you're going to intend to actually want to use the item and actually look at it, then it's a good idea to give it a name that makes sense, that you'll remember. So you can call it anything you like. It should indicate what it is it's actually storing, and you can't have any spaces. It follows the rules of variable names, so no spaces, and it's also a good idea to have some clear way of identifying what it means. So because it's a text box, I'm going to start off the name as txt, so that I know, all right, okay, that's what I know personally as being a text box. You can call it whatever you like. You might want to call it box, whatever you think is appropriate. And then after that, without any spaces, I'm going to sort of give it a name that suggests what's going to be in that text box. So it's going to be the answer. So I'm going to call it txt answer. And again, we should keep the font size the same. And I don't want it to have any words in it. So I'm going to go to the text and remove that. So now you can see I've got a nice empty text box ready and waiting for the user to enter their data. Final thing is I need some way, once they've entered their data, I need something, a control that they can click on to submit their answer. So I'm going to use a button. So drag across a button, and again resize it. Can make it the same size as the text box or whatever you want to do. So again, with the button highlighted, I can see all the properties. So again, I'm going to give this button a name. So I'm going to start it off with BTN, and I use that to tell me it's a button. And it's going to be a submit button, so I'm just going to call it BTN submit. It's just good practice. You could call it anything, but it's good practice to have some kind of naming convention that you understand. Again, I'll change the font size. The content, I don't want it to say button, I want it to say submit. There we go. So that concludes the creation of our user interface, which is great. Looks fine. We could tidy it up a wee bit. Obviously you can go to the next level and add in colours and things like that, but it looks fine for our purposes. Now remember, at this stage all we have is an interface, so if I do try and run it, we will see that that window will be displayed on the screen, but if we try and interact with the window, it won't do anything, simply because we've not written any code to tell it what to do when the user interacts. So here's the window, it's running, it's popped up on the screen, and I can interact, I can put in a value, I can click and submit, but you'll see that nothing happens. So we need to now write the instructions to tell the computer what to do when the user interacts. So this is where our C# comes in. So what is the interaction here? Well, the interaction is the user enters a value and clicks on this button. So what do I want to happen? At this stage, it's a good idea to write down the list of steps you want to happen. Basically, when the user clicks on the submit button, I want it to check the answer and tell them whether or not they're correct. So at this point, I want to be able to create a handler that deals with what happens when the user clicks on this button. So to first of all create that, we need to double click on the button. So by double clicking the button, it automatically creates a click event, and in the C# file, it creates an event handler that allows us to enter a list of instructions that will run when the user clicks on that button. If you're interested in where it creates the click event, you can actually see it creates it in the XAML. So if we look at the line for the button, so if you highlight it, it'll highlight the line of code in the XAML. If I scroll along to the end, what you'll see is it's added in this bit of code here. So this is basically says here, I've now added a click event. And when this click event happens, so when someone clicks on this button, then it will go and run the set of instructions inside the event handler called btn submit _ click. So that's in here. So we need to write our list of instructions of what we want to happen. Now, remember I said that we have to keep our instructions together as a unit, and the way we group instructions or group lines of code together is we wrap them up in these curly brackets. So you'll see that these curly brackets have already been created. An opening bracket for the start of the instructions and a closing bracket for the end. So where the cursor is where we'll start typing our instructions. At this point, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's a good idea to write down the list of steps. So this is technically referred to as an algorithm, just a big fancy word to mean a finite list of steps that will run from beginning to end, and at the end you should have achieved your task. So it's just a list of instructions. So let's write down our list of steps of what we want to happen. So the first thing we want to happen is we want to actually get the user's answer out of the text box. So we want to find out what it is they've entered. So we want to get their answer out of the text box. And remember, when we get a bit of data, we have to store it in order to be able to use it. If we don't store it, then it floats around and we can't find it again. So remember that we use variables, which we covered last week, as containers where we store our data, we stick a label on it, and then that way we can easily use the label to find it again and then access the data. So first step is get the user's answer out of the text box and store it. Straightforward. Once we've done that, we need to check to see if the answer is correct. So if the answer is correct, then what do we want to do? Then we want to show a message, or show a congratulations message. So this is just in English, this isn't any coding, it's just a list of instructions in plain English. Else, so if the answer is not correct, so otherwise, so if it's correct, obviously we tell them congratulations. Otherwise, so if they enter anything else other than the correct answer, we're going to show a message indicating answer is incorrect. And that's it, just those 3 steps. So get the answer out the text box, store it, then we can actually look at the data, we'll look at the answer that we've stored, check it to see if it's correct. If it is, congratulations message, otherwise we get a message indicating that it's incorrect. So what we want to do now that we've got these steps is we want to take each of these steps in turn and translate it into an actual C# instruction in here. So the first step is to get the answer out of the text box and store it. So in order to do that, we need to create a variable. If we're storing the data, we need to have a variable to store it in. So to set up a variable, remember it's just like creating a container in memory. There's two bits of information that we need to have in order to do that. First of all, we need to know what data we want to store inside the variable so that we get a big enough container. Once we know that, we also need to know what label we want to stick on the container. And that's it. With those two bits of information, we can successfully create a container of the correct size with a label, ready to then receive any data. So let's do that first. So the variable we're going to set up is going to store the user's answer. The user's answer is a letter. It's going to be A, B, C or D. So in C#, if we're storing letters, then we store them as strings. So we first of all put in the data type in lowercase. So remember, C# is case sensitive. So if you do use the wrong case, then it won't recognize the word you're trying to refer to. So the data type first, so it's a string, and then the label. So I'm just going to call it answer because that describes to me what's in the container. It's the answer. And then remember, every instruction, just like every sentence in your essay ends with a full stop, every instruction ends with a semicolon. So we've now got our variable set up, and you'll see it's underlined green, which makes you think, well, what's wrong there? It's not red, so it's not an error, but what it's doing is it's giving us a warning that we've set up a variable and we're not using the variable. We are about to use it in a minute, so once we use it, you'll see that that green line will disappear. So the next thing we want to do is we want to get the value out of the text box and assign it to this variable. So one of the things that we discussed is that in computing and programming, when we are creating instructions, we put the answer or the result on the left hand side and the calculation or the steps, the processing, on the right hand side. So it is back to front compared to what we are used to in maths. So to go back to the example from the slides, we're used to normally writing 1 + 1 = 2. In programming, we would actually write 2 = 1 + 1. So the result goes in the left. So the result I want is I want to store something inside the variable called answer. So I'll put that on the left. To assign a value to a variable, we use the assignment operator, which looks like equals. So that's basically saying I'm going to put something inside the variable answer, and this is what I'm going to put in it. So what we want to put in it is the contents of the text box. So to get the contents of the text box, we use the label, the name that we gave the text box. Now you could jump back over here, click on your text box and look at the name field to get that. Or what you can do is, if you've got an idea of what the name is, you can start typing and it will pop up with any suggestions. So you can see it pops up telling me that's what you've got currently in your solution. So that says get the text box. Now you'll notice that it's underlined red. That's because when we get the text box, it gets us all of these properties, everything. So we can't just say give us the whole text box. We need to say get the text box, and then we need to tell it which one of these values we're interested in. So obviously we're interested in the actual text, so what it is the user's entered. So let's go back to our code. So once you've typed in the name of the text box, we hit dot. This is the dot operator. So after we hit dot, it comes up with a list of everything we can ask about the text box. The spanner means all the properties. So basically everything with a spanner relates to everything inside this properties box. So all of these values are available. Everything with a box is what we call a method or a behaviour. So this is things that we can ask the text box to do. Text boxes can't do very much, as you'd expect, but there's a few things we can ask them to do. And finally, the lightning bolt are the events. So these are all the different events that you can set on a text box. So again, we're not interested in creating any events for the text box. We're just interested in getting the text property. So again, what you can do is you can filter just on the properties and you can scroll through to find out which one you want. Or if you start typing in, then it'll narrow down your selection, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the text property. And again, remember, end of instruction, just like the end of a sentence, the semicolon. So to read this back, easiest thing to do is read it right to left. So this is saying get the text out of the text box called txt answer and store it in the variable answer. So we've now completed step 1 of our list of instructions. The next step is we have to check to see if the answer is correct. So in C# we have, as we learned in week 2, we have the if statement. The if statement uses a keyword, if, followed by a set of round brackets. After that, we need to list all the things we want to happen if it's true. So again, what we do is we want to group all the things to do. And to group anything, remember we use curly brackets. So it's always a good idea when you write your if statement to put this basic structure in place and then go back and fill it in. That way you won't forget to put in brackets or miss anything out. So inside the if statement, inside the top line, we need to put in the condition we want to test. So we want to test if the answer is correct. So in our case, we're testing the answer. So we're saying if the answer, and then we need to test it. So to test, we can use the conditional operators in C#. So the things we can test for equality, not equal, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. That's the set of things we can test for. It doesn't sound like a lot, but actually that combination of all those things is more than sufficient to solve all the problems that we'll come across. So here we're testing for equality. Now equality is one you've got to remember what the actual operator is. So because we use equals to assign something, it's already got a meaning. To check for equality, it's actually double equals. So now we're saying if the answer is equal to, and then we need to check the value. What do we want to check it against? Well, the correct answer for our quiz, let's just go back to the question, is the capital city of Australia is Canberra. So the correct answer would be D. So let's put in D. Now, if I just put in D, you'll see that it underlines it in red. Any text in C# has to be enclosed in quotes. Basically, to tell the computer, this is not an instruction, it's a bit of text. So we're saying if the answer equals D, then what do we want to do? Let's just go back to our instructions. We want to show a congratulations message. So we're going to use a message box. So message box, and then we're going to show a message in it. And again, it's text we're showing, so it goes inside the quotes. And we're going to say, congratulations, you are correct. Brilliant. So that's us now completed step 2 and 2A. But what happens if they put in a value other than D? What if they put in A, B or C? Well, we need to tell them they're wrong. So basically we've got two paths in this problem. We've either got the correct path or we've got the incorrect path. So we can use an if-else statement. So if this is correct, we'll do this. Else, which is a keyword in C#, and again the curly brackets to wrap up the list of things we're going to do, and it's only one thing. We're going to pop up a different message box, this time telling them, sorry, try again, because they were wrong. Okay, and that's us finished step 3. So that's us done everything in our list of instructions. So what to do now is to run it and test it. So if I run it, so I hit the wee green arrow. Remember when we hit the green arrow, there's a lot going on in the background. It's taking our code and it's converting both the XAML code and the C# code into binary, into ones and zeros, because that's all a computer understands. Once it's done that conversion, behind the scenes there is a binary file. Once it's created that binary file, it then gives it to the computer and the computer runs it. And this is us seeing the result of it actually running it. So we've got our quiz popping up. So let's say I give the right answer and I hit submit. Congratulations, you're correct. Excellent. And then I said OK, and it just takes me back to here. So what would be nice is if once we've submitted it and we've got a message, it'd be nice if it reset the text box back to being empty again. So let's add that feature in as well. So let's stop just now. So if it creates the correct answer, it gives a message, else it gives a different message. So once it's given the result, let's set the text box back to being empty. So to change the text box, we need obviously to use the text box name, txt answer. We want to change the text and we want to simply make it empty. So we can just use an empty string. Okay, so let's run this again just to prove that that works. So let's give it the correct answer again. Or in fact, let's choose a different one. Let's do it a lowercase d, which is also correct. Oh, but it said, sorry, try again. And it does clear the text box. So that's something you've got to be very careful of. If you're getting text in, you have to check both cases. So uppercase D or lowercase d. So let's extend our code to check both those conditions, because if it's an uppercase D or it's a lowercase d, both of those are actually correct. So what we're going to do here is we're going to update this test. So at the moment we've said if the answer is equal to uppercase D. We want to also add in here or the answer is equal to lowercase d. So again, by saying it in English, it helps us to understand what code we want to write. So I've just said if the answer equals uppercase D or. Now or in C++ is the pipe symbol twice. So it's down in the bottom left hand corner of your keyboard. So that is the or symbol. So I've said if the answer is equal to uppercase D or the answer is equal to lowercase d. So now I'm checking both. So let's run this again. So again, I'm going to put in lowercase and submit. Congratulations, good. So now it recognises both of those. Obviously, when you've got an if statement that's got two different paths, you need to test both paths. So far we've tested this path. So now let's put in a wrong answer. So let me put in B. And it correctly tells me that that's incorrect and to try again. Okay, so that concludes the simple quiz application. Hopefully you can see that it is quite straightforward. It's just being able to remember the syntax, which just comes through practice. So it does take a wee bit of time. But the important point to take away from this is understanding how to build the user interface, how to create this event handler, and then how to write the instructions. And importantly, it's a good idea before you start writing these instructions to get a bit of paper and write down the steps in English first, and then that way you won't forget, and then you can simply use the step and think about how do I translate that one step into C# code and do them one at a time. Okay guys, that will conclude this video.